afternoon. Sorry for that slight technical delay we had there, but welcome to our annual CBF conversation. Today we are thrilled to welcome both Shane McNary, who's currently living in Slovakia, and Nell Green, who is now living in South Carolina. So we welcome you to this CBF conversation, and our topic today is creating a culture where missions thrive. We're just delighted to have you with us, and we hope that you'll be able to share this information with others. I'm Ellen Seacrest, and I serve as the manager of Global Mission Engagement, obviously not the manager of technology on days like today. But we're so delighted that you have chosen to be with us today. We're really excited about this conversation, and our two colleagues are on with us who do exceptional work. And I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. So, Nell, if you'll go ahead and introduce yourself for us.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a real joy to be here with you. My name is Nell Green, and I've now served with the Corporate Baptist Fellowship for almost 27 years. It'll be 27 years in May as field personnel in Miami, Florida, Brussels, Belgium, and for the last 10 years in Houston, Texas. And before that, I had previous field experience in Dakar, Senegal in West Africa. I now serve in a new role as the Offering for Global Missions Advocate. I work with field personnel, with CBF development and communications, state and regional organizations, our churches, our field personnel, to support and to strengthen the Offering for Global Missions. I'll be doing some other projects as well. For those of you who remember Missions Marketplace, we'll be doing some work with that. And basically what I do is I share about the really important work that field personnel around the world are doing. And in telling the mission story, I highlight the mission distinctives of CBF and the impact of long-term presence of our field personnel.
Great. Thank you. Shane?
Thank you, Ellen, for hosting the conversation. Nell, it is good to see you again.
Good to see you, Shane.
My wife and I have been CBF field personnel since 2004. We're both native Arkansans. She worked as a nurse in a variety of responsibilities before coming to the field. I was a pastor at a church, and I did taxes for fun. So that was my life before moving here and finding out what life was really about. Our ministry is primarily, but not exclusively, among the Roma people in Slovakia and Czechia. We partner closely with local churches, schools, different organizations. Additionally, I serve with the Baptist World Alliance as a permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva, where my main focus is on freedom of religion or belief. And I also serve with European Baptist Federation as the chairman of the Freedom and Justice Commission. In that capacity, one of the exciting things that I was doing earlier today, my time, so it's already been a very long day, as we have a training program set up for a human rights-based approach to freedom of religion or belief, and got to spend the afternoon with 18 participants from Sweden to Serbia, Northern Ireland to Lebanon to discuss human rights and freedom of religion or belief. When people ask me what I really do, other than spending a lot of time in the last year in front of a computer screen, I like to travel, sit, have coffee, and cake with people. And I can't imagine
Nice.
a better ministry.
Nice.
Absolutely. I like those kind of ministries myself. Being a semi-homemade cook, it's always fun to entertain and to hear, and to particularly with our field personnel, to be able to hear stories as well as to see things of sentimental value, because they always tell a story as well. So I'm curious, Shane, if what you think about how it is that we create a culture where missions thrive, and explaining and maybe tell us a little bit about how you've done that in your context, both PC, pre-COVID, and how what things you've learned through that experience.
Ellen, I'm grateful that you start the conversation this way. As I shared in my introduction, my immediate ministry context is with Roma in Slovakia and Czechia. Because I was not sent to be the great American savior of Slovak or Czech church culture, it's essential for me to approach my sisters and brothers in this context as first a learner, as a student, and then only later as a collaborator. And that collaboration is based on a mutuality of relationship. Now, in this immediate context, mutuality often means to learn to recognize and appreciate, respect what already exists, even if I cannot fully embrace it. This is how I also approach the broader context where I'm involved in ministry, including congregations that relate to Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. I have learned so much from different congregations about how they create a culture where missions thrive. And just as I may not embrace every aspect of how and what an individual congregation may do, in relationship with them, I respect where they are on their own journey. Now, I want to talk about three different characteristics, because I was a preacher a long time ago. Three different characteristics that I've learned from my immediate and in the broader context about creating a culture where missions thrive. First of all, leading with a calling. I'm reminded of the famous quote that Albert Einstein never said. Everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. To thrive, we need to first know what we are called to do and then live into that calling. We also need to lean into our context. Missions begins with context, is tied up in the middle with context, and it ends with context. And for this reason, I'm really glad that you formed this question, Ellen, tying culture and missions to a context, a specific location at the intersection of place and culture, theology, and even our own being. Because to thrive, a culture of mission must be driven by the same guiding principle as buying a house or good exegesis. Context, context, context. And finally, we need to learn to shift towards empathy. We Baptists, thanks be to God, have an innate gift of overflowing compassion. We can write up a good newsletter about a tragedy to tap into the sympathies of our constituents, and then remind them that the highest act of compassion that they can do is open up their pocketbooks. A thriving culture of missions transcends this voyeurism of tragedy and helps us see and connect with real people, image bearers whose life and experience is bound up with our own and with whom we can form a relationship of love and hope.
That's a lot to take in, and it does preach without a doubt. And
Absolutely.
I particularly the words mutuality, respect, and context are such a powerful experience. I know in my own travels and my own long-term partnership with some mission organizations, that has been central to success, and that's been central to sharing the gospel in so many different ways, through example, first of all, through cultivating beloved friendships, cultivating beloved community is so significant. Now, when we talk about thriving missional congregations, what does that mean for you in this long tenure context that you come from?
Well, when we talk about that phrase, create a culture where mission thrives, there are three main words that really just jump out at me. Create. That means we're being very intentional about doing something. We're being very intentional about where we're going and how we're getting there. When we talk about culture, we're not talking about an individual. We're talking about people together. We're talking about a community. We are talking about the whole and not just one of us. And then when we talk about thrive is a word that I've come to really love in the last few years working with refugees, because thrive to me says we're way past survival. way past survival. And sometimes I think we feel like missions is on a road of just barely surviving. And I think we need to be talking about thriving. When we're creating a culture where mission thrives, I believe we are working to uphold some core beliefs. We have a collective vision. We share social values, as well as the sharing, obviously, of material resources. But I believe it's building a culture where the stakeholders, the leaders, and the participants all come together to become change makers. I like that word too, Shane, of mutuality. It's all of us together. It's not one or the other. I believe it's a culture of abundance rather than scarcity. I think it undergirds the extravagant generosity of God and God's overwhelming love towards all of humankind, not just one people or one place. I believe it creates a space for all of us together to share in these commitments that we've made, of bearing witness to Jesus Christ, seeking transformational development, and cultivating beloved community. And I believe that space is created, one, through the offering for global missions. Giving allows for any and everyone to creatively invest, not just in a transformative work, but in real relational connections and mutual friendship. I think that space for sharing is experienced as all of the stakeholders, all of the leaders, all of the participants, all of us together understand and articulate God's working in the world through global missions, whether that's education, promotion, holistic engagement, but it's our whole CBF community that allows for a flourishing, thriving culture where there's common vision and purpose. And finally, I think that space for sharing in these identified mission distinctives is created when we come together on bended knee. I believe that together we believe God, together we seek God, and together we find God. We experience unity as the Holy Spirit binds us together in purpose and call, whether we're stakeholder, leader, or participant, and together we thrive.
Yeah. Again, some standout words, particularly our community. And we're built for community. I mean, Jesus himself sought community. So we're commanded from the very beginning of time that community is part of the joy of life, as well as becomes the educational tool for us lots of times. And in both of your companies, had the glorious opportunity of living other places for so long that you recognize the different sets of communities and what community looks like, that it doesn't always have to be the 2.5 children in the brick house in the subdivision. Community is everywhere.
Exactly.
And all. And community is what causes us to thrive. We don't thrive just by ourselves.
Absolutely.
Together in that context within the congregation as well. And those mission distinctives that you talked about, cultivating beloved community, bearing witness to Jesus Christ, and seeking transformational development, really, even though they're listed 1, 2, 3, it's almost like one long sentence, because one leads to the next, and all leads back to the sacredness of community and that personal relationship with Christ. Shane, most of us grew up with the idea of missions being Wednesday nights, RAs, GAs. I'll date myself back in those that time. And then in youth time, we took that big annual mission trip where we went to save whoever was that we were at that time. And those weeks were significant, and they were spiritual markers in a lot of our lives. But we all came home with that idea of we were going to be so changed, and we're going to change the world. And 2 or 3 days later, we're back to the normalcy of our usual lives and that kind of thing. And it's not to say those are not significant relationships or experiences, because they helped me since my call. When I was 17 myself, and it was through some of those experiences. But CBF from the beginning has been all about long-term presence, not just the one-off let's go here, let's go there one time. Let's build that community where community thrives through relationships. And with CBF doing that, how has that transformed, or how has that made your mission experiences thrive? And how is that long-term partnerships with congregations and individuals really benefited your ministry there in Slovakia?
Ellen, I need to begin by confessing that I didn't grow up in church, and so I never had the privilege of being one who got to go on a week-long mission trip and then come back and so quickly forget everything that I had experienced. The little bit of time in my teen years that I was in a small rural congregation in Arkansas, our most pressing things were not so much about sending people on a mission trip. It was, paying the bills. And I think the most missional thing we did while I was there was, I remember this long discussion in a business meeting about whether or not we should spend what was then an enormous amount of money, I don't know, a couple $100, to buy an immersible heater for the baptistry.
Oh, wow.
And for that congregation, and for me in that congregation, this was how we were trying to work out what it meant to be missional in our context. I even back then had a love for numbers, and I convinced them that if they would just baptize more people, the per person cost of that baptistry heater would come down really low.
Nice.
But when we think about mission trips, and as you have framed it, I've been listening to Semler's new album and this song Bethlehem, where she sings about mission trips, about being scams and doing more harm than good. Mm-hmm. And even as it is described in that way, and as you have described it yourself, Ellen, further along in the song, that child of God says they want to be someone that God would call. And I think we can't get away from the truth that God still calls people to missions. God still calls people in and through short-term ministry trips or what have you. And with that being the case, I think of so many other things that churches do. It's been a long time since I was in the business, but I recall these horrible things that were birthed in the bowels of Sheol, youth lock-ins, where people would go in. I see that hand.
You've done a few of those, Ellen.
And just because something has minimal effect, churches still embrace it, and programmatically we still go forward with it. I think what has been interesting for me as I think about our relationship with local people here in Slovakia, this for me helps me understand that mission engagement, even short-term trips, are not primarily about a program event, achieving some sort of item or knocking something off the calendar. It is about relationship. For us, the relationships that we have with locals. Now, intentionally, we avoid expats, English-speaking expats. We want our friends to be local. If I need somebody, I want to call somebody who's going to know how to get it for me. And so that is how we have built our networks here in Slovakia. And when we seek out these local friends, these some of whom at first were English speakers, but now that's not much of an issue, it is that relationship that we have with them which makes it even possible for us to thrive. And because we have been here long term, we've seen those relationships grow and deepen and be transformed by our walking together along the way. Part of our relationships are with local organizations or churches or so forth. We've seen organizations transform. We've seen leadership come and go in the years that we've been here. We've helped organizations survive transitions of leadership. And that's not possible if you're only here for 2-3 years, if you do one term and then go home and never return. Now, let me be clear, I do not say that in judgment of anybody who has had a short experience on the field. What I am saying is an affirmation of the topic that you bring up about long-term presence.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to be here over an extended length of time provides something for our local partners that they don't get to experience when somebody just comes and goes. One of our early contacts was Pavel. He's an elder and runs a local nonprofit that distributes religious literature. And I remember him asking me, we came here in September of 2004. This was in February of 2005. And even at that very beginning, as he started to explain to me about the culture and how things are among churches in Slovakia, he described this euphoria that existed among the churches immediately after the revolution, the Velvet Revolution, where all the communists changed their ties and came back to work the next day. And he says that in that euphoria, all of these Western missionaries were coming. They brought all of their money. Everybody was excited to be in this former communist country. They allowed churches to be built, churches to be renovated. And he said, but then over time, as new fields began to open up further away, those became the more exciting places to be. Missionaries took up and left. They took all their teams with them. The money dried up. And he describes the depression, the spiritual depression that exists still in the lives of many churches who had been promised a relationship, ostensibly based on a common relationship with Christ, but a relationship with a foreign missionary who then found other fields to go participate in and left these churches alone. So for me, long-term presence is not just about a length of time, but it also is. It's about a depth of relationship that is allowed because of the length of time. And I think to be able to speak to what CBF enables globally in our ministry to and with the global church is that our long-term presence as field personnel helps transforms the landscape. We come with brilliant ideas and all of this stuff that we learned back in the West. And once we get here and find out what's actually going to work, and be able to labor together with somebody, this is the hope of long-term presence. Now, it also, long-term presence also means that we get to have time to communicate that back with churches through newsletter, through going and speaking. We get to communicate that back with Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, because it is not only the mission field that is strengthened through long-term presence of CBF field personnel. CBF as an organization, I mean, to look at Mel and Butch with over 26 years of mission experience, and other colleagues who bring a wealth of mission experience, that not only enables stuff to happen in the fields where we minister, it also strengthens CBF as an organization.
Now, I didn't start going to church myself till I was about 9, and my church experience was so profound for me because it was such a loving and giving place, and I was so introduced to missions. And then once I went to college, went to seminary because I was fulfilling my calling, I got better understanding of that long-term presence. I went to Romania to Project Ruth for the first time in October of 97, and had just a profound experience. And the day before we left, I thought I would come back, but a little girl said, I said to Anka, "I'll see you next time," and she said, "No, you won't. You won't be back. You never come back."
Oh.
And I was like, oh, it was gut wrenching. I didn't want to leave then. But that short little lesson from that 9-year-old changed the whole trajectory of missions for me. So for over 20 years, that's been my commitment to Project Ruth and the many times I've been. But it is that long-term presence, and it's not about bringing the candy and bringing the crafts and having a spectacular week, which we typically would do. But it's also that returning. It's also that deep community that you talk about, and the undergirding of the church. Now, some of what you were talking about, that thriving piece of that. So now you've you and Butch served for over 26 years together, close to 27, and all. And you've now transitioned into this new role with CBF to share with us your gifts and what you've learned and that kind of thing. So how do our churches create a better mission culture for their church through the offering for global missions and through that? Tell us a little bit about your work and how you're able to help churches thrive.
Well, as I mentioned, Butch and I had a field of service before we began serving with CBF. So we actually left for the mission field in 1986. And when we left, all that existed at that time were handwritten letters and a rotary dial phone that was too expensive to use. And yes, I do know that I did just seriously date myself, but we did not have computers. We did not have emails. We did not have mobile phones. We did not have Zoom or WhatsApp or any of these wonderful, amazing things that helped us connect. And if you wrote a letter, which I could never even begin to say how many handwritten letters I wrote in those days, because I know this surprises y'all. I'm the communicative one in our family, right? So I'm the one who did all those letters. And it took weeks for a letter to arrive. And it took weeks for us to get a letter back. And honestly, it was disheartening sometimes, even maybe depressing. During that time when field personnel, we would go home, we became, if you will, a window to the world for those who would come. And, I still look back and I just think of all those times, all of them just, listening, hanging on to our words, hearing our stories, loving our pictures, sitting through endless, long slideshows. I mean, my goodness, the patience they had to do all that. But I think in some way, they were living vicariously. They were sharing that mission experience with us as much as they possibly could. And definitely, they joined their prayers with ours and they gave financially. And that sustained us, right? I mean, it got us through. But now we live in a day where individuals and churches enter the story with us. They don't just watch it unfold. They don't just listen to how it happened. They engage in the story. They're a part of the story because of our technology, our communication, our transportation. These industries have opened huge doors. And now churches, individuals journey with us. They come with us. They support us in real time, tangible ways. They walk with us in our struggles. None of us pretend that a lot of what we do is easy. And I have been so blessed by the churches and individuals that say, I'm going to walk this road with you, right? And help us in those real ways. They help very tangibly in the work that we do. They partner with us spiritually, physically, and financially. But here's the best part of it for me almost. We're able to do the same with them. We are able to accompany them. We're able to join our churches. They too are a part of the distinctives that we talk about in CBF. It's not just field personnel addressing global poverty, global migration, and global church. Our churches are engaged in these things as well. So as they seek ways to address these issues in their context, we get to be a part of that with them. And all of a sudden, this whole missions experience has become a very mutual thing. Churches that share with their field personnel through the offering for global missions, through Encourage Your Church, through Prayers of the People, through prayer associates, through mission education, mission teams, Zoom calls, Facebook, all of these amazing tools. These are churches who say, I want to enter the story with you, and I want you to enter into my story. Practically in Houston, when we were there, what did that look like? Well, it meant they rejoined us in rebuilding after Harvey. It meant that they were a part of the baptisms of some of our friends who made faith decisions. Means they were with us on the border as we're raising awareness about human trafficking and trying to advocate for victims. For us, it means that we're with them as they do things like address food insecurity or bring migrant relief or build relationships with people of other faith and cultures. I know there's a lot negative happening in our world right now. I tend to be a positive person. And I frankly think we are living in a beautiful time. Field personnel and church together being the hands and feet of Christ. I think this is a culture where mission thrives.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the part of I call us the pew sitters, those that are in the church, for us to know that we have a hand in Slovakia or in Belgium or in Uganda or wherever it is really an amazing piece. And now we have a firm relationship with your work at where I had been serving on church staff, and when you would come to do the International Fashion Show and talk about the outfits of every individual lady and the plight of the women there, that shifted a lot of our congregational thinking about seeing people in a more holistic way and changed the way we were able to build some community through that. Both of you are dependent on the offering for global missions. It helps fund your presence, as well as the Encourager Church helps you to fund your ministry pieces. Shane, why is that an important role for you, and why our Encourager Church is important for you?
As you note, Ellen, my wife and I have from the beginning been supported by the offering for global missions. And I think we were trained exceptionally well in how to do the ask for OGM, because that's pretty much has stuck with us. We still find that when we go into congregations, when we speak to individuals, it is more natural for us to ask for a support for the offering for global missions because of what it represents. When Paul employs the word koinonia, most often we hear it translated as fellowship, but when he uses that term to describe both the gift and the giving of financial support back for the church in Jerusalem, this to me that's what the offering represents for the fellowship. It is the fellowship, the joining hand in hand of pew sitters, of church leaders with what is going on the field, as Nell said just a moment ago. And what it also means for us to be able to go in. I don't like asking for money for myself. I'll be able to be very candid. The missionary timeshare thing was really difficult for me to grasp until I realized this is not what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue to ask for the offering for global missions. And should God want us to remain, then God will provide the money. Thanks be to God, through God's people who are excited about what not just what we are doing, but what all field personnel are doing. We have been able to have a ministry budget funded while only and always emphasizing it is the gifts to the offering that make it possible for us to be here. It is not a one or the other. It never can be a one or the other, because
Absolutely.
One without the other ceases to exist. But it is a marriage of the two. So when we go, our default is just to talk about the offering. Ask me all day about the offering. We can go at it. It slips in really, really nice. Sometimes it comes across as funny, but it is always the offering that we want to talk about. Now, Encourager Church, Ellen, you're the head of the gig that knows. We just signed our first Encourager Church back in November.
Wow!
Signed the first formalization of one of these, and why? I mentioned the mutuality of relationship and everything earlier. I'm not opposed to paper. I've written a few MOUs myself. I'll sign a contract here and there. I bought a house last year, so I'm okay with signing that. Actually, my mother-in-law signed for me, but This more formalized contractual engagement, especially when I was over here. My wife Diane was able to be in person in the States when our first Encourager Church, Pulaski Heights Baptist Church there in Little Rock, Arkansas, signed up to be our Encourager Church. It only formalized what had already existed.
Right.
And we have another church or two that does that. And I think for us, we have Encourager churches, plural.
Sure.
We have formalized this through Cooperative Baptist Fellowship and Ellen, your office, with one church so far.
Yeah.
What does it mean for us? To have churches which come alongside and to pray for us, to have churches that we can contact and during the time of COVID say, hey, we'll pray, we'll record a prayer for you, we'll do this for you. We offered everything but liturgical dance. If you need a media thing, we'll give it to you. And to be able to connect with those churches. Now, the formalization through the Encourager Church process is okay. Zero criticism from here. But it is that relationship which is essential.
Yes.
The Encourager Church only formalizes what already exists.
Neil, before you do, I'll say I've been in this role 2 years this week actually, and the church is my significant piece of my work, and it has been just a really beautiful expression of people's realization of the commitment that most of them were already having. But what it has gifted others to do is to see that relationship, and they then want to be a part of it too. And so our growth is coming a lot of times from the experience somebody else had as a positive experience with field personnel, and the selection process of how a church is deciding who they want to be an Encourager Church for is really a really helpful piece that's helping congregations thrive, because they're really beginning to think more about their missional approach, looking at the mission portfolio, how they're doing things, looking for long-term presence, how their people can be involved. So I appreciate it. And yeah, there are hundreds of churches that have always encouraged our field personnel, who've been great partners and all. And the nice thing of the covenant for so many is it is a formalized piece. And I think it carries some responsibility for both the church and the field personnel with that takes it to a next level. So thank you for that. Now, your work with global missions and for the offering for global missions, let's just say that the regular old church out here in the U.S. that's part of our fellowship says we already give to CBF monthly, quarterly, or whatever. They've got our money. We pray for field personnel. Isn't that enough? Why should I give to the offering for global missions?
Well, I think Shane touched and described really well what's very, very important. I was on a call this last week with a pastor. It's not either or, it's both and. We need the offering for global missions, and we need Encourager Church and mission programming. But I think one of the things that is distinct is that the offering for global missions funds the presence. Funds the ability to be there. And, I'll speak later to Encourager Church if we have time. But over the years, Butch and I have just been immensely blessed by the way people have sacrificially given so that we can stay on the field. And I have people who have given to me in a myriad of ways, right? We all have something to share. Doesn't necessarily have to be $1, right? But specifically, the offering for global missions is what allowed us to be present, to be there over a long period of time where we could birth ministries, love, nurture, grow ministries, and in every case when we left the field, turn that ministry over to somebody else and let somebody else take the reins and take it, frankly, in our opinion, every time to a new level. But during that time, we were also given, and Shane has already spoken to this beautifully, and I just would, say amen to it. Basically, it allowed relationship sincere relationship, sincere friendship, mutuality. It's not transactional. It's not I'm there to give to you or do for you or whatever. It is an authentic relationship that's mutually transformative. It transforms both of you. But those kinds of relationships don't happen overnight. Every Tuesday morning, I pray with a group of women that I have now known. Well, one of them I've known probably almost 40 years, and the others over 30. You don't form the kinds of relationships that let you pray together like that in a few days, in a few weeks, or even a few months. It takes years. The presence and us being there allowed us to not only develop these relationships, but it allowed us the time that we needed to really understand culture, to really understand the context we were in, to learn the language. You don't go to language school and learn the language in 6 months and walk out and think, oh, gee, I can relate on a deep level because now I have this massive language ability. It just doesn't happen that way. By the time we left a couple of places, Belgium and also Senegal, I was actually doing translation work. But I was very cognizant of the fact I still had misses in my language. I still couldn't get quite everything because all of the language wasn't there. You don't get that unless you have time. Important for me, and I'm sure for Shane, it lets you learn, being present for a long time lets you learn the contexts in which you can share faith authentically. Too many times we come with our Western context and our Western ideas about how we share faith, and you're going to get there and discover that's not how that works there. You've got to figure out how sharing faith works in their context. That only comes over a period of time. Being there over a period of time lets you understand the community so that you understand the felt needs. Sure, you can do surveys. What are the chances that you're really going to understand the felt needs of that community? And even as you're understanding that, you begin to understand the assets that they have, and then you come together for mutual transformation. The offering for global missions allows for just that. Being present over the long term, present to individuals, present to your partners, present to the church, present to the community. And without that long-term presence, bearing witness to Jesus Christ, seeking transformational development, and cultivating beloved community becomes extremely challenging. That happens with long-term presence.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, those three have been really a key. Those are three key mission distinctives, obviously, for us, and fit into so much of what you do on an everyday basis as field personnel and the rest of your colleagues, as well as what we do here in the CBF office here in Decatur and around. I think Together for Hope, follows the same type of distinctives. I mean, they're creating beloved community and rural poverty initiatives and different ways. Our advocacy works to continue that. For our churches, we are constantly looking, and when I get to meet with mission committees, and some mission committees are trying to move their churches along into healthier mission practices. We try. Many of us read Toxic Charity, and that shifted some of our thinking and all. So, creating beloved community, bearing witness to Jesus Christ, and seeking transformational development are such key features, as well as the global church, global migration, and global poverty. I think what that third one was, are so significant in that. How does the average church take that though and figure out how to implement some of that into their mission practices in the local congregation that benefit that congregation as a whole, plus that community, therefore the state, therefore the world? Shane, I know that's a little bit different than the question I had said I was going to ask, but I think you can have an answer for that probably. But we really want to help our churches figure out how to thrive in there. We have about 7 minutes, so if you can talk for just a minute on that, and Nell, you chime in there as well, and we'll use this as kind of our last big conversation piece for that.
All right. Since I only have one Encourager Church, let me brag on them a little bit more.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Well, you've got another one in the works, so.
All right, I know we got it,
Yeah.
and they come up in this story also. Months ago, when COVID hit and people began to struggle, the learning curve of using technology. You mentioned the technical issues earlier, Ellen. Even those of us with more experience, this does not always go smoothly.
Right.
One of the things that Diane and I have done, we've been under lockdown like everybody else since last March, but a lot of it has been more strict since last fall. And we were in conversation with folks from Pulaski Heights, and they asked if we would teach Sunday school. And I said, hey, that works great for us because it's the middle of the afternoon for us on Sunday. By the time they have Sunday school, we can meet on Zoom. And then the question became, what would we teach? And Diane and I, looking around what we had easily available, suggested, why don't we use the study guide for the CBF missional distinctives, the 3 contexts and the 3 distinctives, and let's see how that works. We did that not only with Pulaski Heights, we also did it with Holmeswood Baptist up in Missouri. And then we also were able to reach out to a congregation in Georgia, Warm Springs Baptist Church. And the ability to connect with those churches through the literature that CBF has produced for the context and the missional distinctives. If they didn't get anything out of it, it's all their fault. It was so exciting for us to be able to hear them, to encourage them to look at their communities, to encourage them to say, what does global poverty look like in your neighborhood? It's not enough to speak about global poverty as a context somewhere else. If it's a context, you need to look at what it is in your area. And with each of those churches, to be able to walk through the missional distinctives material with them and help them to not only discover what it means to create beloved community, what it means to bear witness to Jesus Christ, and the exciting episode when we get pushback from members of some churches about how we bear witness to Jesus Christ, exactly like Nell said. If we assume that we can only do it through a method which we know as a white North American male, we've already failed most of the world. So what does it mean to bear witness to Jesus Christ in a particular context? What does it mean to seek transformational development in rural Georgia? What would that look like in your community if you address food deserts that are in your context? And that, for both Diane and I, were as we went through it, some of the weeks we added extra, sometimes we couldn't do it. Those multiple weeks all last fall were some of the most exciting Sundays I've had in a long time. I got to connect with churches, and as Nell said, being able to go into churches is a joy. It will never be a burden for me to be able to go in and walk into a church and share with them what God is doing through Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. Never would that be a burden. But to be able to connect with them virtually, because this is what's allowed now, and to be able to lean into that material that CBF has produced and help them see that in their context, I'll sign you up tomorrow or the next day to be able to do this again and again, because it was restorative for us.
Sure.
Because we had to look at our own context again and to be able to share those things with the various churches that we've done that with.
Great, thank you. Well, you and I have talked some through our office work about how versatile our field personnel have been, and the number of videos that you all have made, the number of calls you've been on, the Zooms, you know, all the creative ways that you have had to figure out to be a part of ministry. Now, has that been a rewarding piece as well? And as Shane says, that has opened up some other opportunities. Has it been challenging as well as rewarding for you?
Well, you know, there are parts of it, obviously, that have been challenging. I was fairly comfortable with a lot of the technology before the day came. But there's nothing, and Shane, I share your joy about going into our churches. There's nothing quite like walking into one of our churches and feeling their embrace, right? I mean, let's just be honest. That's something that we have not gotten during this time of COVID. Yeah. But what I have been amazed at, and Zoom or I use Facebook video a lot, or whatever, WhatsApp. I use WhatsApp a lot. These have afforded us the opportunities to make these connections. I think if I can refer back to what I said in the beginning, core values, shared vision, shared social values. I think we have this with our churches. And even during this time of COVID, as they have scrambled and we have scrambled to try to figure this out, they have not forgotten that we're in this together. And they have not forgotten that we're still out there trying to figure out how to do ministry in our context while they're trying to figure out how to do ministry in their context. And the beauty is we can still be there to help each other. I think sometimes we have this idea that our field personnel are out there on their own, getting their work done, kind of siloed and plunging forward. Well, yes, it's true. Shane is all the way in Slovakia and I am in South Carolina. But Shane and I share vision. We share these common values. We share our commitments. We share what we're working towards. And in CBF, we come together regularly to talk about this and to say, where are we? How are we making this? How, as a team, can we help one another? I think the beauty of what Zoom has done and these other platforms, it has let us join our churches as they process that and as they go through it. Shane, I'm going to steal your idea. What a great idea to use that Bible study and take, some of our church groups through it. I think that's just fabulous.
Okay.
I've got one church I'm going to call, in fact.
I've got updated statistics if you need them.
All right, there you go. So I feel like it's been hard. I am not minimizing that, but it's also opened up some avenues and some relationships that maybe we didn't have before. And let me just say this for Encourage Your Church, and I know, Ellen, we're coming to the end of our time. Encourage Your Church, for one, Encourage Your Church might look like one thing, and for a church, it might look like another. For one of our Encourage Your churches, it was they wanted to supply us with a place of respite and rest. They wanted us to come here, have a place to stay, and not worry, and to be able to recuperate from some intense ministry times. Other churches said, you know what? We want to be all in on this anti-human trafficking work. And they just made possible amazing things. So I think Encourage Your Church just opens up so many possibilities.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you both so very much. And I'm sure the thousands that are going to log on to watch this that haven't gotten on yet today will find it as rewarding. And for me, working in the CBF office, this is very, very helpful, to hear some of your words as I help lead churches through some missional approaches and helping them figure out how to thrive as well. What? That wasn't me. Let me throw it'll help us learn how to thrive post-COVID as well, because I think all of our churches are reevaluating, they're looking, they're wanting to be more invested. And COVID has provided us that, as well as hundreds of opportunities for our field personnel to be present when you couldn't have been present all the other times. Two quick things. We're reinitiating our Speakers Bureau that will roll out in March, and people will find out more information about that. There's 16 of our CBF office staff that will be available to be virtual and then in person. To come to your churches to talk about certain topics and ways, but it will also be a way for our field personnel to continue to be virtually present with you when in person is just not possible. So thank you. Thank you for all that you have done. Thank you for all that you've continued to do for this world to make it a better place. Thank you for the ways that you have created beloved community for all of us as well. Our next CBF conversation is scheduled for March 16, and our guest will be John Mark Bose and Christian McIver, and we'll be talking about missions, advocacy, and justice in church and worship. And Christian is just a fabulous young man who has written lots of music, and we've used him several times on some CBF events, but he's going to be able to talk to us some about worship and missions and advocacy and how we can incorporate that. And
Nice.
this isn't a bad word, even though it makes people back up sometimes. So thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for your commitment to CBF. Thank you for your gifts to global missions as well as to CBF. And one last plug, if you are interested in Encourage Your Church program, give me an email. Shane, thank you. And Nell, thank you so much. Look forward to being in conversation with you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.